Breezy, humid. Can't rule out a shower or thunderstorm. The high at 79. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
68 degrees at O'Hare. Next news at 6:30, and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We talked to Jonathan Tobin yesterday from Jewish News Syndicate about the outcome of the Israeli election and who has the best chance to form a coalition government. Is this the end of the Bibi era in Israel? Too soon to tell at that time when we talked to him yesterday morning, although he did say it was more likely than not that you would not see a continuation of Benjamin Netanyahu as the Prime Minister of Israel. Then shortly after our show yesterday, Benny Gantz declared victory.
Yeah, he said, I'm the winner. He's the leader of the Blue and White Party.
So there's still a lot of machinations here, as we discussed yesterday. People voting in the Israeli election is just the beginning of the electoral process there, and then you have the political intrigue of putting together these coalitions, which Netanyahu has been so adept at doing for so long. Can he still do it again? Is that just a political posture Gantz is taking, more so than an indication of what the likely power structure is going to be in Israel after this recent election? For insights into those and more topics, we're pleased to be joined again by Caroline Glick. She's the senior columnist at Breitbart News, senior contributing and chief columnist at the Jerusalem Post. Caroline, thanks so much for joining us. Please appreciate it.
Thanks. I actually moved from the Jerusalem Post to Israel Hayom, which is Israel's widest circulation paper recently. So just so everybody has an update, and you can also read me at carolineglick.com.
Great, thank you. We'll make that notation. So Caroline, what does Benny Gantz's declaration yesterday mean?
Nothing. I mean, it's wrong. He didn't win the election. I mean, it's true that his party got 2 more seats in the Knesset than the ruling Likud party did. But what Netanyahu did yesterday was he took all of the satellite parties on the right and the religious coalition, the social conservative religious coalition that he's been governing with for the past several years, and he formed one bloc of 55 seats. So it's not a governing majority, which requires 61 out of 120 seats in Israel's Knesset or our parliament, but it's a bloc that is right now unbreakable, which means that the implications of what he did is that Benny Gantz, whose party did win the most seats, but the center-left parties that he leads only have 44 seats. So he can't form a government. And the only way that he can form a government is to join a unity government with Netanyahu, or alternatively, one of the smaller left-wing parties like the Labor Party, which used to be a ruling party in Israel, can join a Netanyahu government. And if they don't do that, then we're going to have to go to a third election. So that's the implication of what happened yesterday.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because Gantz doesn't have enough seats to govern, and he won't form a coalition with Netanyahu. So when do you think this third election is going to take place?
I don't know that it is going to take place. I think the public here doesn't want a third election. I think the politicians are exhausted and do not want a third election. And I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure on either the Blue and White Party to join Netanyahu-led coalition, or one of the smaller left-wing parties, or specifically the Labor Party, to join coalition led by Netanyahu. I think that it'll take a few weeks, and right now, we're all used to instant gratification and internet and instant communication, but the president of Israel, who's really just sort of like the Queen of England, I mean, doesn't have a lot of duties, but the one duty that he does have is he has to decide the head of which party has the best chance of forming governments after these parliamentary elections end. And so he's only beginning his deliberations on Sunday, and there are another 5.5 weeks before whoever gets given the opportunity to form a government has 6 weeks to do it. So we're at the beginning of a drawn-out process. It could take a little, just a few weeks, but in the greater likelihood it's going to take a couple of months for things to go down one way or another. And if no government is able to be formed, then again we're going to go to another election probably in December or January, and that'll be taking place. They'll decide about that, and it'll be taking place in January or February or March, depending. So we're really looking either at getting a government formed, which right now looks like Netanyahu will form it in the next several weeks, or we're looking at going to new elections in the next few months.
Is there a particular issue or offer that Netanyahu can produce that would bring over the additional seats that he needs to put together that majority governing coalition?
There is, but I think that a lot of this is just the dynamics of politics. So it depends. If you start seeing splintering in the ranks of the Blue and White Party, which really isn't a party, it's a conglomeration of three parties that ran together. So if they start breaking apart, then you're going to also see the Labour Party, which is a faction with only 6 members. So if they joined, he would have a 61-seat coalition. They may decide that they want to run and make a deal first. There are deals that can be made with both options, or all three options, either all of Blue and White, or a faction within Blue and White, or the Labour Party, and it just depends whether they're going to willing to do it. I mean, right now, the one position that did win a majority in Tuesday's election was that a majority of the people who were elected don't want to serve under Netanyahu. And so the question is, what price is it going to take for them to change their mind, or whether the Likud is going to oust Netanyahu? Given that Netanyahu is supported by around 98% of Likud voters, the chances of any politician, any lawmaker inside of Likud trying to unseat him is effectively negligible. So if Likud stays stable under Netanyahu's leadership, we're likely going to see either a fragmenting of the Blue and White block of three parties, or we're going to see the Labour Party joining a government led by Netanyahu.
Are we to read the results of this election as political instability in Israel, or are we to read it as this is just an election in Israel and this is how it goes? Does it at all change how we understand Israelis' politics to be?
Unfortunately, I think that what's happening in Israel is very similar to what's happening throughout the Western world. We see it in the United States with the radicalization of the Democratic Party. We see it in Britain with the radicalization of the Labour Party. And we see it here. And what's coming across in country after country is that whereas you used to be able to have bipartisan actions or multi-party actions, across-spectrum actions, Labor and Conservatives in Britain together, Republicans and Democrats together, increasingly you're finding that even parties that refer to themselves as center-left parties are unwilling, under any circumstances, to work with center-right or right-wing parties. You're getting more and more of a intensification of politics of personal destruction, and an attempt to personalize issues rather than having substantive arguments about issues. As the left becomes more radicalized, it doesn't want to have substantive discussions. So I think that this is something that unfortunately is now afflicting not only Israel, but it's afflicting many other countries in the Western world today. We see even in Australia. I mean, it just everywhere that you see these elections, you're seeing this kind of cleavage and polarization of the domestic political climate that's making it impossible, as a practical matter, for people to work across the ideological spectrum with one another.
Now, there's no denying the chummy relationship between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Did President Trump help or hurt him in this election?
I think that he helped him at the margins, but I think, one of the problems is that this was an election that the media and obviously Netanyahu's political opponents did everything that they could, I mean, and this is not unusual, to hide substantive issues where Netanyahu has done a stellar job as prime minister, and instead, again, make this all about yes or no to Netanyahu. In the United States, you have never Trumpers, and in Israel, we have never Bibis. Bibi is Netanyahu's nickname. And people have become really obsessed with hatred for him. It's most pronounced among politicians. So by personalizing this and making it all about whether people like the prime minister or hate him on a personal level, the substantive issues where President Trump has made such a contribution to Israel's national security over the past year and a half really couldn't get the kind of traction in the discourse that they ought to have gotten.
What's the potential that the Joint List Party, which finished third, it's Arabs, that they could play a role in this? That some like Benny Gantz would be willing to make an alliance there in pursuit of political power in a majority coalition.
So I think it's really important when we talk about the Joint Arab List to understand something that, particularly in the United States, the media has been hiding in a very prejudicial way. For instance, the Washington Post came out with an editorial yesterday where they accused Netanyahu of racism for warning the public that the Arab parties were going to gain political strength because of the high voting levels in Arab cities and towns in Israel. But what people don't recognize, and that certainly the Washington Post has been deliberately hiding, is the reason why this is a concern is not because they're Arabs. It's a concern because the Arab political parties in Israel are all viciously anti-Israel. None of them accept Israel's right to exist. We have people who were elected on the Joint Arab List who have written odes to brutal terrorist murderers on their Facebook page and their Twitter feeds. You have members of the list who are openly supportive of Hamas, openly supportive of Palestinian terrorism and terrorist campaigns against Israel, and applaud terrorist operations after they take place, particularly when Israelis are killed. So these are people who have been elected to the Knesset. These are an agglomeration of three parties that came together to run for Knesset, where there's literally nobody who can be trusted on national security issues because they openly extol the destruction of Israel. So when people say they don't want to have them in the government, it's not because they're, God forbid, racist. It's because they're rational.
And so that would be a bridge too far for Gantz. I mean, they're not part of whatever plays out here because of what you just described.
I think it shows the pathological level of hatred towards Israel, towards Netanyahu on the left in Israel, that there are people who are, generally considered sane, who are urging Gantz to make a coalition with the Arabs in order to unseat Netanyahu, which I just find distressing on so many levels. So I don't think that Gantz will do it. Because I think that there are too many people inside of the center left that would object, and inside of his own governing party, one of the factions in his party is actually a right-wing party that's basically based on hatred of Netanyahu, but he doesn't have a governing coalition with the Arabs because the party, there's one party in Israel that refuses to say which side of the ideological spectrum it's on, which is the formerly right-wing populist party called Israel Beitenu, which is run by the former defense minister Avigdor Lieberman. Lieberman is a populist ideologue of the right, and he's just decided that what he really wants to do is unseat Netanyahu. And he's not going to serve in a government with the Arabs, which means that even with the Arabs, Gantz can't form a government. He doesn't have enough seats.
So right now, as the handle on it is, it's either going to be Netanyahu forming a majority government, or it's going to be another election.
Exactly, that's what it looks like now. Gantz has no path, has no coalition. Nothing. Once Netanyahu set up a block of 55 members of Knesset who are all on the right or in the religious parties, he has no path forward. He has no working coalition.
She is Caroline Glick. Get all of her writings at carolinegglick.com, carolinegglick.com. Caroline, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.